Hey guys, this is MacHeads 101 with our 18th programming tutorial. Now, in the previous tutorial, we made it so there were two buttons, but they had a little problem, and that was that they bounced on the same velocity. And that resulted in all kinds of weird behavior where they could sometimes go off the screen and all of that. And I also gave you guys a challenge at the end of the video. I said, try to make it so that there are three buttons, which actually results in more problems because, there are three buttons sharing one velocity. But first of all, in order to add three buttons, you might have done it in a more complex way, but all you need to do here is say UI button, button 3 equals this, and buttons, add object, button 3. And when we run this on the iPhone simulator, let's go ahead and see how this looks. And as you can see, there are three buttons, and there's probably more problems and all that good stuff. So let's see. Alright, they all went off the screen except for one of them. So anyway, that is how to add three buttons. That's the answer to the challenge. Now, let me just update this to show you what it'll look like. Now, what we're going to do in this tutorial is make it so that there is a different velocity for each and every button. So we're going to declare another array up here, and this array will be called button vels. And what button vels will be is it'll be an array of stuff like this. And let's assume there are three buttons. So it's basically going to be an array of vectors or velocities. So the first item here is the X, and the second is the Y. First is the X, second is the Y. And as buttons might be button 1, button 2, button 3. The way this will work is this will be the velocity for the first button, or for button 1. This will be the velocity for button 2, and this will be the velocity for button 3. Now, the way we're going to be representing these right here, these right here, is we're going to be using a CG point, which has an X and a Y. So each of these will be a CG point. Now, you can't put a CG point in an array, and I'll explain that to you in a second, but we're going to be wrapping it. So let's say button vels. Let's keep that declaration. And let's go down here, and as we review, button vels equals nil right now. And we'll say button vels equals ns mutable array, alloc, and init. And now we'll say button vels equals this. Alright, so for every button we add to buttons, we have to add button vels, or else it won't work. There has to be the same number of velocities in button vels as there are in buttons, otherwise serious problems will arise. So let's add stuff to button vels. Right here we're populating our buttons, but let's say CG point vel, and this will be the same velocity for everything. So all of the buttons will have 4 as their velocity, X and Y. X velocity, Y velocity. Now, this is great, but we can't put vel in button vels. This would cause an error. And let me just show you what causing an error. First of all, right here you can't do that. Sorry about that. You have to say CG point make because that's a function. But you really can't add a CG point to a button, to an array. So in order to fix this, we have to wrap the CG point in something called an NS value. So we're going to say NS value with CG point. And this basically returns an Objective-C object that we can't put in an array. It creates an Objective-C object around a C object, which is what what a CG point is. So we can do this 3 times for all 3 velocities. And now, button vels equals 4. And this is our velocities. Let's build this, so that way the silly error goes away. So now what we have to do in our timer tick is we have to get this velocity and modify it, and then put it back in the array and save it. So the first thing to do is we don't know right now in this loop which number button this is. We just know that this is a button. We don't know if it's the first button, if it's the second button, and we need to know that in order to get the place in button vels. So what we're going to say is int button index equals buttons index of object click me. And this will tell us where in this array click me is. Now we're going to say ns value button vel val equals button vels object at index button index. Now we're going to say cg point button vel equals button vel val cg point value. Wow, that's a mouthful. Anyway, now we can say button vel dot y and button vel dot x, where it normally says velocity at x and velocity y. And we can say button vel dot x and button vel dot y. And now we have to save this CG point. So we're going to say buttons, or button vels, replace object at index, button index, with object, ns value, value with CG point, button vel. And this will remove the object at this index and then replace it with a new value with our new velocity, because our velocity can change if it hits the walls. So in order to update this in the array, we have to create a new ns value with a new CG point, and we have to change this in the array. So there we go, we got the array working, hopefully, and let's go ahead and build it and see how we do. And now there's one more thing we can do, is get rid of the two velocity x and velocity y's in the header, because we really don't need those. We replaced it with this array. So now, let's build it for the iPhone simulator. Oh, and I have to get rid of this because we don't have these anymore. And let's go ahead and run it. And woo, they're all bouncing independently. Very strange. I have to admit, this is pretty awesome. So, that is how to have two, or, any number of separate velocities. For every button that you add to buttons, you have to also add a velocity here. Now, let's go ahead and make this more fun. Let's make a random velocity. So arc4 random mod 4 or mod plus 2. Arc4 random mod 4 plus 2. And this will basically be a random number from 2 to 5, I guess. So let's copy this. So now each of our buttons will have a separate random velocity. And this is even more strange. Yeah. So this is what I like to see. They're independent buttons bouncing around with independent velocities. This is no longer useful because we already have this. So in our next tutorial, I guess we're going to be playing around with this some more. We're going to make it so it dynamically, you can have the user, when they get enough points, it'll add another button or make some of the buttons smaller. There's just so much more fun we can have now that we're dynamically working with an array of buttons. So that was our 18th programming tutorial. So thanks for watching MacCads 101. Subscribe and goodbye.